Have y'all kept an eye on the socials when it comes to Evan Stewart, Texas A&M's wide receiver? Because he had a comment under a teammate's picture that made a lot of noise. And I think we need to kind of dive into this a little bit. This is the difference between this show and some other shows. We're going to talk about Evan Stewart and his Instagram comments, all right? That is the real lifeblood of college football, if you will. So the Instagram comment was under a teammate's picture talking about his surprise with Jimbo Fisher no longer being the head coach there and the guys transferring out and saying, I could have never seen this coming, is what his teammate said on his picture. Evan Stewart comments underneath and says this, quote, "I didn't get paid $1 from A&M, but, quote, sliced bread," that'll make sense in a second here, "had y'all thinking we was all millionaires." Okay, so some backstory here, because this is important. Sliced bread is a username of an individual that posted on an Oklahoma fan site about Texas A&M's 2022 class and how much money was allocated towards that class. So he posted, again, not on Texas, not on TexAgs, not on a Texas A&M fan site, on an Oklahoma fan site, and said there's $25 to $30 million being allocated towards this recruiting class. Now, this is a message board post, first of all, not based in anything, not based in fact. It's all just, I could go post whatever I want on the message board and say, hey, Nick Brake's making $100 million a year for On 3, and nobody could say anything about it, okay? So the funny part about this is Jimbo Fisher somehow saw this post. I don't know how. Somehow saw this, probably from Twitter, and he went on there and said, in a press conference, he acknowledged it and said how that's just completely false, how that's not true, and we're all kind of like, yeah, nobody was really taking sliced bread seriously to begin with, but okay, coach, we're with you. So that's what he's talking about when he says sliced bread, again, citing this message board post, had y'all thinking we were all millionaires. So there's a couple options here, right? This is either not true, this is kind of sort of true, or not true at all. Or true, not true, sort of true, half truth. So what do we make about this? Let's kind of unpack these one by one. The feeling here is if Evan Stewart were just lying about this and he's saying that I got a bunch of money from A&M right off the bat, kind of be a weird thing to not tell the truth about, right? Also, just a weird platform. So under a friend's Instagram picture is not typically where you go out of your way to lie about something. If you disagree with something, you post about it, or you make your thoughts felt about it very casually. You don't casually lie under an Instagram picture. That makes no sense to me. Other part of this, NIL is not illegal now. Like, there's no reason to try and save face and say, we weren't getting any money. No, this wasn't happening. Like, if this was happening, for the most part, this is college football now. So nobody's really going to have too much of an issue with it. Lastly, Jimbo Fisher, the coach that is no longer there, is just that he's not there anymore. There's nobody to vouch for here. There's nobody to say that Jimbo Fisher wasn't telling the truth when he went and called out sliced bread in a press conference. Like, this doesn't add up to me. So Evan Stewart lying through this comment, I would have a hard time believing. The scenario I lean probably most towards in this whole situation with this Evan Stewart Instagram comment, I lean more towards this being kind of a half-truth. Because where there's smoke, there's fire, right? How much smoke has there been around Texas A&M being a player in NIL? And to be honest, more power to you. We're seeing now teams that use NIL correctly, that are in the NIL game from the jump, are able to build the roster in such a way to where it's competitive and on the field. A&M, they've built a roster to be competitive. They haven't put it together the right way. But my gut is that this was probably a motivating factor for Evan Stewart in coming to Texas A&M. Probably the NIL opportunities, at the very least, was a factor. Now, did Texas A&M pay Evan Stewart directly? By nature of what he's saying, no. But to imagine that, Evan Stewart wasn't getting anything his first year at A&M feels a little bit counterintuitive. I have a hard time getting behind that one. Like, the money for Evan Stewart probably came from somewhere. Was it directly from A&M? Was it from Jimbo Fisher? Like, by nature of what he's saying, no, and I kind of believe him there. But there's also reports right now about Walter Nolan and the collective having conversations with him to try and keep it at A&M. So what does that tell you? A&M's in the NIL game, their collective's involved, and they're going to try their best to be competitive. You would be stupid to not try and be competitive in an NIL landscape for a guy like Evan Stewart and what he is for A&M. So, if it's true, which is, of course, the last scenario that we have to unpack here, if Evan Stewart is saying, I didn't get paid $1 from A&M, and he truly never got anything at any point in time early on in his career, Like, that's bad business on both sides of this. For A&M not to be competitive for Evan Stewart, and for Evan Stewart to go to A&M for free. Like, he is the number 31 player in On3's NIL Top 100. He currently has an NIL valuation of $892,000. Now, there's also reported NIL deals for Evan Stewart, so we all understand now Evan Stewart, if he wasn't getting anything early on, he's getting something now. But if you're a top player in the country and you're doing something for free, like, what are we doing here? A&M, what are we doing? Evan Stewart, what are we doing? Like, let's kind of rise to the occasion here. It's modern college football. NIL is real. NIL is not frowned upon. It's not a dirty thing. It's not a negative thing. It is a part of the game now. So Evan Stewart and A&M, again, I have a hard time believing this is true, but if it were true, I would say, what are we doing? Again, we're not buying that. We don't think that's true. But if we were to pretend that were true, it would make no sense to me. It would be bad business. So this is kind of the overall question we have kind of hearing this. What should Mike Elko do now? Right? Like, what does Mike Elko have to do now with all this talk around NIL and the transfer portal? And that was kind of the question people had at the start of this was, well, he's got a top roster. He's got a really talented roster. Can he keep him in-house? Some people are saying, do you want to keep a roster like that in-house? And for Mike Elko, this is my thought on this. I think the big thing for him, forget NIL, forget the transfer portal, forget the roster for just 10 seconds. To achieve the success you want in College Station, I think it has to be all about, from the jump, establishing crystal clear elite standards. Because here's what standards do. They kind of have a life cycle of their own. The first thing standards do is they filter out the wrong people, right? It's just like a weed out course or those first couple days of practice where you're running for however many hours at a time or however many difficult drills you got to do or how difficult that first test is in that class. It's supposed to weed out the wrong people. The people that don't want to be there, the people that aren't supposed to be there, the people that can't be there, just can't cut it. It weeds them out. Okay? So if you aren't up to the standard here, we're going to find out real quick and you won't be a part of us going forward. Okay? So that's the first part. That standards apply to you. The second thing it does is once those standards are in place and you have the right people around, the right people that aren't a part of it kind of catch wind of it on the recruiting trail, on the transfer portal, and that attracts the right people. How many times have we seen this at Georgia? How many times have we heard about Georgia and what they are or aren't doing early on in the NIL space, and the right guy saying, you know what, I still want to go to Georgia because I believe I can develop to the nth degree, eventually make the NIL money I want to make, and win a lot of football games and help myself play in the NFL. It attracts winners. The right standards attract winners. And once you have the right standards set, filtered out the bad, got the good in, if the right people are upholding that standard, and the right people will uphold the standard, then it's self-sustaining. Then it kind of runs itself. Then you just got to worry about keeping the bad out and keeping the machine rolling and everyone doing what they're supposed to do internally. So for A&M, a lot of people are going to say, well, what about talent? You got to have talent, right? By nature of Texas A&M being the brand that they are, recruiting the space that they are, I would have to imagine they will at least recruit the right guys. But people are saying, well, talent this, talent that, talent this, talent that. A&M has always had the talent these last couple of seasons. That's not the issue. Had talent and went 500 the last 2 years combined. So talent's not the focus here. Talent clearly isn't the solution. You got to have it. It gets you in the building. But structure, culture, standards, all those things, it's what's going to get A&M where they want to go. So the Evan Stewart's comment on NIL and slice spread, I think it's funny. I think if we're reading into it too much about, what was or wasn't happening early on, take it or leave it. But again, it goes back to what you do now with Mike Elko. Standards, culture. That will ultimately be the difference maker for A&M and how far they go under the Elko regime. So I can't wait to watch what happens next. Can't wait to watch what they do under him. And it really is, man. It's a Ferrari. It's got a great engine. Do you have the right driver? Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.